Hello, this is Craig with RedChip Companies. Thank you for joining today's event with ASP Isotopes, which trades on the NASDAQ under the ticker ASPI. With us today, we have Paul Mann, CEO of ASP Isotopes. We will begin with a brief presentation in a moment, and then we'll open up this event to your questions. I will keep everyone's lines muted throughout the presentation. Users may ask a question at any time by using the Q&A tool at the bottom of the Zoom window. Before we begin, please allow me to read the Safe Harbor Statement. This call may contain forward-looking statements within the meaning of the Private Securities Litigation Reform Act of 1995. All statements pertaining to future financial and/or operating results, along with other statements about the future expectations, beliefs, goals, plans, or prospects expressed by management constitute forward-looking statements. Any statements that are not historical facts should also be considered forward-looking statements. Of course, forward-looking statements involve risks and uncertainties. With that said, I now turn this webinar over to Paul. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Craig, and thanks everyone for joining us to listen to this. And I'll give a brief overview and have some prepared remarks, and then we'll go for Q&A. So if you just review these forward-looking statements, that'd be fantastic. And so, what do we do at a glance? So we're basically an isotope enrichment company, and we have two plants in South Africa that will be starting up in the first half of the year and should start generating free cash flow this year as well. And this is an industry that has multiple geopolitical tailwinds right now, helping us, and we'll talk about that later on in this presentation. So this just kind of shows you the group structure of how we're set up. So you'll see we have a company incorporated in the United States. This is on NASDAQ. That's ASP Isotopes, ticker code ASPI. Then we have three main subsidiaries or business units. On the left-hand side, you'll see we own a 51% stake in PET Labs, which is a radiopharmacy company with a dominant position in South Africa. Most of our operations are done through ASPI South Africa, and we have two manufacturing plants in South Africa, and we have a subsidiary focused on laser enrichment of medical isotopes in South Africa too. And in September, we incorporated a new subsidiary called Quantum Leap Energy. That's also in Delaware. And that focuses on producing nuclear fuels of the future. And I think there's a lot of excitement about that division at the moment and the technology we have in that division. And so we'll talk about all of these during this presentation. Now, our main milestones this year really are critical milestones to get to cash flow break even and start producing free cash flow. That's any company's main goal when they start off. We only started this company up 2.5 years ago. So to go from 2.5 years to build out two manufacturing facilities and to get the cash flow break even, we kind of feel it's a pretty significant milestone. We also intend to secure additional supply agreements for new isotopes, and we'd like to start building our first enrichment facility outside of South Africa, most likely in Iceland. So isotopes, as I mentioned earlier, have one of the most compromised supply chains of any material in the world. Many of these isotopes are used in everyday activities, such as generating nuclear power or medicine, so oncology treatment or imaging. But they're also used for things like quantum computing and advanced semiconductors. About 85% of the world's isotopes are produced in Russia, with a balance in Europe. There's no domestic production of stable isotopes in the US at the moment. And hopefully one day we'll change that. Now, in terms of what an isotope is, an isotope is basically two elements that are basically the same, but have same chemical properties. They are the same, but have different masses, different number of neutrons in the nucleus, and that gives them different physical properties. So take silicon, for example. There are three isotopes of silicon. One has a mass of 28, one has a mass of 29, and one has a mass of 30. And the isotope number 29 actually harms the conductivity of silicon in a semiconductor. So we can remove that isotope and just enrich so that 100% or close to 100% of the isotope is silicon-28. The semiconductor will be thousands of times more powerful. To think about how we make money, take a kilo of silicon, a kilo of sand, that probably costs about $1 a kilo. When we enrich silicon-28 to 99.995% silicon-28, a kilo of that, it's about $600,000. Take carbon-14, you take a bag of carbon, so a bag of charcoal or whatever carbon you choose, and a kilo of that's probably about $1 as well. A kilo of carbon-14 is about $24 million. So we take very normal, very standard chemicals, and we turn them into very special materials that certain industries need and can't operate without them. We have two technologies in ASP Isotopes. The first is the aerodynamic separation process, which is great at enriching gases or elements that can be turned into a gas. Basically, it's a stationary wall centrifuge. We spin the gas very fast in a circle. It's approximating the speed of sound. And then we separate it through various nozzles and flow directors. The second technology is quantum enrichment, which uses a laser to excite certain isotopes. And this is a fantastic way of separating isotopes that are difficult to turn into a gas or have properties that don't lend themselves to the ASP technology. Our plants are very cost effective. The capital cost of building a new centrifuge or a new isotope enrichment facility is often billions of dollars. Huge capital projects. Our plants are much smaller. Our ASP plants don't have any moving parts. Just the compressors are moving part. They're much smaller. They're modular. We can scale them, and we can start off with them being small and add them as demand grows. And they're very environmentally friendly as well. We don't have any nuclear radioactive waste. We basically take a feedstock and then we enrich a feedstock and we get some depleted feedstock, depleted tails, and often we can sell those depleted tails back to the marketplace. This chart here kind of shows our isotopes of interest and approximate expectations of when we hope to have these in the marketplace. And you'll see we've got a number of isotopes here, both in nuclear medicine, green energy, and industrial applications like quantum computing. And as I said, we expect to have our first isotopes for sale this year, and that should start generating free cash flow. So let's talk about nuclear medicine first of all. And this chart here kind of shows just how nuclear medicine has evolved over the last sort of 30, 40 years. And it's really grown tremendously, whereby 40 years ago, we were just using technetium-99 as a diagnostic to diagnose certain diseases. And then, more recently, we started thinking about theragnostic radiopharmaceuticals. And in the future, we've got lots of new radiopharmaceuticals that will treat different forms of oncology, beta therapeutics and alpha therapeutics, depending on exactly what they, what radioactive decay the particle has. There's been significant investment in this from companies like Novartis and Eli Lilly. It's consensus forecasts for some of these drugs are multiple billions of dollars. And in most cases, they start off with a stable isotope. They have to convert into a radioisotope. And our focus really is in producing the stable isotopes that go into making some of these drugs and diagnostics. Here are the end markets we're interested in radiomedicine. This just kind of shows what the stable isotope is and what the radioisotope is. And this is the picture of our first plant for carbon-14. You'll see it's pretty small, it's modular. And this plant will start producing product, or should start producing product in the second quarter of this year. We actually announced yesterday that we've just started processing the feedstock for this plant. And we've signed a take-or-pay contract with a Canadian customer for at least $2.5 million of product a year. It could be more, we'll see, but that's a take-or-pay minimum, and that's supported by a bank letter of guarantee. Carbon-14 is an interesting isotope in that it used to be purely supplied by the Russians, and there hasn't been any supply to the market really for a couple of years. There's a lot of pent-up demand for this isotope, and as I say, we're looking forward to becoming the leading supplier of this fairly soon. Molybdenum-100 is actually the isotope the company was formed around, and molybdenum-99 technetium-99, which is produced from molybdenum-99, is really the workhorse of nuclear medicine. It's about a $4 billion market, and we'd like to think we can take some market share of this. We think molybdenum-100 is actually a more convenient way of making technetium-99. We think it's a much more attractive way, it's a cheaper way, and as I say, we're ready to start supplying this year to the marketplace. Zinc-68 is another one we have a lot of interest in from customers. I'd expect our first plant in Iceland to be zinc-68. Zinc-68 demand is set to grow dramatically over the next sort of 3 or 4 years. This is one of the main diagnostic agents used for beta and alpha emitting drugs. And, if you look at market expectations and market forecasts, commentators are expecting a 10 to 20 increase in demand for this product over the next several years. And there's no way of producing this using generators. It's just not cost effective. There aren't enough generators. And, taking zinc 68 and converting to gallium 68 is the obvious way to do it. And we'd like to think we're here maybe in 2025. And then finally, ytterbium 176. We put out a press release about this yesterday. We actually started building our third plant in South Africa recently, and that's to produce ytterbium 176. This is an essential starting point for lutetium 177 based drugs. And for example, Novartis's Pluvicto consensus forecasts are about $4 billion for that. And if you look at this launch, it's been a real struggle getting lutetium 177 into the marketplace. It's a very challenging isotope to make. There isn't really a Western supply of ytterbium 176. We have considerable demand for this product. We hope to start supplying the market in 2025 for this isotope. I mentioned semiconductors, silicon 28 for semiconductors already. We expect to supply silicon 28 this year. Enriched silicon 28 will accelerate the speed of a semiconductor thousands of fold and allow technologies like quantum computing and artificial technology. And we're talking to many semiconductor companies around the world to enrich this to 99.995%. And we believe we're probably the only Western company that can do that, certainly this year anyway. As I mentioned earlier, South Africa is not known for cheap energy. In fact, it's not known for any energy. We have regular blackouts here where the lights just shut out for a couple of hours. Our larger plant in South Africa, we actually have to have 1.5 megawatts of diesel generation capacity to keep the plant going when we're in load shedding moments. That increases our cost of goods dramatically. I think, having got our first 2 plants constructed here, the goal is to start building plants in Iceland. And we've got a number of customers who'd like us to build plants in Iceland. We'd expect the customer to put down a very significant deposit or down payment, or maybe take a stake in the plant and finance the balance of the plant using project finance. We've secured a very long-term energy deal at less than 5 cents per kilowatt hour. We found a building and we're in late-stage discussions with the government about getting the correct permits in place to allow us to build these plants. But, we're very excited about moving here, and it'll really help enhance our gross margins. So now we'll talk about Quantum Leap Energy, and this is a division that, as a lot of investors are focusing on now and talking about a lot more. We only formed this company in September. We've been working on it for a couple of years, but we only kind of displayed what we've been doing more recently. So it should be a fairly well-known fact that we have an energy crisis in the world. We need to double electricity production over the next 25 years, at the same time achieve carbon neutrality. There's no obvious way to do this. Certainly, we believe protesting isn't the way to solve it. The solution, in our view, is innovation and investment, and we'd like to think we're going to be part of the innovation to help solve this problem. Now, I shouldn't really need to explain this, but there's obviously increasing demand for energy. Many people are concerned about energy security, particularly in the nuclear world. Russia's responsible for a vast proportion of enriched uranium. The United States imports most of its uranium from overseas, and only 4 companies are really involved in enriching isotopes, and they're all state-owned, essentially. And many governments are now committing significant incentives to incentivize companies, I guess, like ourselves, to go to their countries and try and enrich more uranium. Increasing nuclear power, again, I shouldn't have to explain what's going on there, but COP28, I think the world agreed to have a massive increase in nuclear energy over the next sort of 20, 30 years. And many countries have said they're going to increase their amount of nuclear energy. Nuclear energy benefits, again, I shouldn't have to explain that, but it's got one of the lowest carbon footprints out there. It's controllable, it's easy to use, it's cheap. And, solar power is great and wind is great when you've got sun and when you've got wind, but when you haven't, it's a bit of a problem. Nuclear power, in our view, is the only real way to have a base load of energy to the grid that allows 24/7 power. I think it's widely assumed the future of nuclear reactors are going to be the small modular reactors, the SMRs. This is essentially taking production line manufacturing to the nuclear industry. What really brought down the cost of a car was the Ford Model T when they put in place a production line. This is the same with nuclear reactors. These are much smaller reactors. The economics are very different to these vast reactors that got built over the last sort of 3 or 4 decades. They're extremely safe. And, the DOE has committed billions of dollars to the Advanced Reactor Design Program. Yeah, some of the leading companies in this space are TerraPower. Bill Gates is the chairman of that company. Rolls-Royce, X-Energy, that's Cam Garfassian, and Oklo, which is actually missing here, that's Sam Altman's company. One of the problems for SMRs is availability of HALEU, high assay, low enriched uranium. And that's uranium enriched up to 19.75%. Typical uranium for a large nuclear reactor is less than 5%. And right now, there is no Western commercial source of HALEU. Many SMR companies are either cancelling projects or delaying projects because of the lack of availability of HALEU. And this chart on the right-hand side is from the Nuclear Energy Institute, just showing how much demand they believe there is for HALEU. We think these numbers are far understate the actual size of the problem. The companies we speak to need hundreds of metric tons each. So when you look at different ways of enriching uranium, there's many different methods. Back in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, we used gaseous diffusion. It's a very expensive way of enriching uranium, huge amounts of energy, very high capital cost. But back in those days, that was the only way of doing it. Then we kind of invented centrifuges, a lot less capital, much greater enrichment factors. That's the selectivity, the alpha. Alpha of 1.15 is very good, much cheaper to build and much more energy efficient. But these are still billions of dollar capex projects, typically very, very large. Many governments and companies have tried to enrich uranium and other isotopes using lasers. So molecular laser isotope separation was explored by a couple of countries. Very low energy usage, involves taking uranium hexafluoride and cooling it down to sort of 80 Kelvin into the ground state, and then using a laser to dissociate the UF6 into UF4. It wasn't really that successful. Atomic vapor laser isotope separation, AVLIS, was heavily researched by the Americans. Much higher selectivity. You heat the metal up to over 3,000 Kelvin and vaporize it, and you photoionize it. Again, this is a very, very, very challenging way to do it, and you need to cascade it as well. And cascading lasers is pretty challenging. An Australian company called Silex is using their own system to try and enrich uranium. Here you cool it down even lower to below 40 Kelvin, and actually you just punch out the U-235. The selectivity there is 2 to 20. You have to cascade it as well. And again, as I said earlier, cascading lasers is a real challenge. Our approach is to use quantum enrichment, which again is used as a metal. We heat it to over 3,000 Kelvin. The selectivity is much greater. We see enrichment factors of greater than 50, and that allows us to enrich products in single stages, which means you haven't got to cascade them. We feel that has significant cost advantages and makes the design of the plant much simpler. This is a kind of a diagram of what quantum enrichment is. We flow a stream of very hot vapor through a laser. The laser excites one isotope, and that then moves to a charge collector where we pick up the product with very high purity. Talking a bit more about nuclear fuel, and again, this shouldn't come to a surprise to most people on this call, but this is the nuclear fuel supply chain. As this chart shows, right now we're seeing real distress in all parts of this market. All components of the nuclear fuel supply chain are trading close to at 10-year highs. It's not obvious what breaks these current trends. Bringing online a new uranium mine takes years. New enrichment facilities cost billions of dollars and takes years as well. And again, same with conversion. We're seeing a US conversion plant come back on stream again, having been shut down sort of 5 to 10 years ago. What does this mean for HALEU? Well, right now, if you put into the formula to work out the cost of HALEU of what each component of the nuclear fuel supply chain is at, you're talking over $18,000 a kilo. Many of these SMR projects were designed to run at HALEU less than $10,000 a kilo. As you'll see, the components of this are shown in the bottom right chart here, where your feedstock alone, just your ore, is over half the cost, and then your enrichment's sort of about a third. So this is causing real problems in the industry. But right now there is no producer of halo. That's an even bigger problem. And if one can start producing it, the cost is going to be problematic for certain IRRs that some people may have calculated. One of the advantages we believe of quantum enrichment is we can take tails, so depleted tails that are sitting waste somewhere in the world, and we can enrich those up to HALEU. We've seen the chart on the right-hand side just how much depleted uranium there is sitting around the world. And this will really lower our feedstock cost dramatically. And if you look at the chart previously, over half your cost of HALEU is the feedstock. So if we can really eliminate that cost, and we can bring down our cost of enrichment by having a really efficient program to do it, that should allow us to produce HALEU at a much lower price. And that's really important, I believe, for the future of nuclear power. If we're going to be successful and drive nuclear adoption in emerging markets, nuclear power has to trade at a discount to hydrocarbon-based power. Historically, most green energies have traded at a premium to hydrocarbon-based power. And in emerging markets where there's a real need for more energy, if it doesn't trade at a discount, it's going to be difficult to incentivize those countries to adopt it. And we're hoping that with quantum enrichment, it allow us to do that. And I think many companies are quite excited about our quantum enrichment process. We've signed 2 MOUs with large North American SMR companies, and we're talking to a number more. And collectively, the companies we're kind of talking to, they need over $30 billion of HALEU between now and late 2030s, and there's a real need to kind of get this technology to the marketplace. And we're hoping that we can do this over the next few years and bring it at a price point that will change nuclear adoption in many markets. So just to summarize and conclude before Q&A, we have two technologies benefiting from decades of research. We have multiple geopolitical tailwinds favoring both expansion of our existing plants and new plants. And so we expect to commercialize our first products in the next couple of months, or next few months, and that should start to allow us to bring in cash flow which we can reinvest into the business to grow it further. So I'll stop there, Craig, and take any questions the audience may have.
Absolutely, Paul. Yes, we are opening this webinar up to your questions. If you want to speak to Paul Mann, use the raise hand tool. You'll find that at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you wish to type in your question, use the Q&A tool that's nearby at the bottom of your Zoom window. Give everyone a moment to think about any questions. We've got one already, Paul. Can you elaborate on the technological risks, if any, related to laser enrichment of uranium? To what extent has this technology been tested?
Yeah, right. So the technology has been tested on a lab scale, and obviously sizing a lab scale plant up to a commercial plant is obviously challenging. I'm not going to disclose the exact details of how this works and how we do it. But what I would say is that we're already building our first laser plant already. Our first laser plant will be at a location called the CSIR in Pretoria, and it will be using lasers to enrich ytterbium-176. The main differences between ytterbium-176 and uranium-235, ytterbium vaporizes at about 750 Kelvin, while uranium is much higher at kind of 3000 Kelvin. So one has to change the method you vaporize the metal. Obviously, uranium's radioactive and ytterbium isn't. So that requires additional safety precautions. But they're fairly similar. Our scientists have also enriched lithium-6. In fact, our Chief Technology Officer, Hendrik Strijdom, wrote his PhD on the enrichment of lithium-6. Lithium-6 also vaporizes at about 750 Kelvin, but it's a much faster molecule. it moves at sort of 1,800 meters per second, whereas uranium and ytterbium are much slower. They're much bigger, heavier molecules, more like sort of 350 meters per second. So there's some nuances between what you're trying to vaporize, what you're trying to radiate. But as I say, we'll be providing more information over the next sort of 12 months as to how the scale up is going, and I guess keep tuned. But yeah, this is a development project as well as a commercial project.
Paul, you did touch on this before, but some attendees have joined late. This person asks, could you move your South African plants to a country where the electricity is more reliable?
Yeah, we absolutely can. And actually, we considered that when, we bought these assets out of bankruptcy in South Africa, and, about 2 years ago. And at the time, we thought about doing a lift and shift, as we called it, picking the assets up and moving them to somewhere with cheaper energy. And, we figured that was just too hairy at that point in the company's life. All of our scientists were based here, our engineers were based here. So we just figured, let's get these 2 plants completed here, get proof of concept, get producing cash flow, and then we'll build our next plants in somewhere like Iceland. And, when we build these plants in Iceland, most of it we manufactured here in South Africa. Actually, the plants are modular, so they get big. You saw a picture earlier of a plant. We'll build the plant, we'll build each component here, each segment, ship it up to South Africa, reconnect it up there, and then turn it on and hope it works.
Keeping on the Iceland theme, somebody wrote, cost and timing of Iceland plants, capital needs over next 2 years?
Yeah, so cost and timing of Iceland plants. I'd like to think we have our first contract signed for a plant in Iceland during the first half of this year. And we'd expect the customer to make a significant down payment to secure their future volumes of isotopes from that plant. When you talk to a customer who's maybe put hundreds of millions of dollars into a downstream plant in the US or somewhere, and they have a need for a specific isotope, and there are only potentially 2 suppliers of that isotope, ourselves and Russia, asking them to put down sort of $5 million to make as a down payment to allow us to finance the plant without needing to raise additional capital. It's a very easy conversation to have, and obviously in return for that, we give the customer most favored nation pricing and priority supply agreements, so we will always supply them before any other customer. They basically have access to their own facility. And those conversations have been very easy to have with many different types of customers. And I'd expect to sign our first one, I said earlier, in the first 6 months of this year. And I'd like to think in maybe 3 years' time, we have 3 or 4 plants in South Africa, all serving different customers with different needs.
Has ASP Isotopes attracted interest from countries other than Iceland, for example, Quebec, with cheap hydropower?
The answer to that is yes. A number of countries have reached out and asked if we would be interested in building plants in those countries. As you can imagine, the United States has got no domestic isotope enrichment capabilities themselves. Neither has Canada. The UK has some. But yeah, there's a lot of countries that are interested in housing us. I think Iceland has been very fast to go through the regulatory and approval processes. We feel more of a pull there, whereas other countries, the pull isn't quite as strong. I think Iceland kind of embraces technology companies. They're used to dealing with challenging, difficult chemicals. And most of the stuff we ship is in kilogram quantities rather than hundreds of tons. And so at some point, a shipping location isn't so important. But I'd like to think in 10, 15 years' time, we have maybe 3 or 4 different countries we're operating in. And I'd love us to bring plants to the United States at some point. Obviously environmental permits and what have you mean that may take a bit longer than other countries.
Going to combine a few finance-related questions here. Paul, one person said, talk about your finance and capital needed until break even. Sources of capital. Someone else wrote, does ASP Isotopes plan to raise capital, debt, or equity in 2024?
Yeah, so we actually raised about just over $9 million in October, and we finished September 30th with sort of $2 and a bit million of cash in the balance sheet. So we've actually never had more cash in our balance sheet than we do right now. Doesn't mean it's burning a hole in our pocket, but every dollar we spend, 35 cents is management. So we think very carefully about how we spend money. But I'd like to think, we're pretty much there. In terms of raising capital, I think we'll probably raise some debt during 2024. We have a number of assets at our plant that in any other country you would normally finance via a lease or via a loan. In South Africa, that's more challenging to do. So we've had to pay for them with capital. And I expect we can refinance some of those into some form of debt. And as we start producing some free cash flow, we can probably leverage that. And I think if we had a blue chip customer who's putting down millions of dollars for us to build a plant in Iceland, we can project finance the balance of that pretty easily. So I would expect us to definitely take on some debt in 2024. We haven't really felt confident to take on debt up to this point either as well. As a young company that's just really evolving and emerging, it's quite daunting to take on a lot of debt from the balance sheet. I think now we feel a lot more confident about our future. And so I think that will allow us to have access to other forms of capital rather than just having to raise equity like raised in the past.
How long until you can have a product for sale?
Well, we actually started processing the feedstock for our first product in December. So the first batch of carbon-14 will take about 6 months to process. So it's likely coming out in June, is my guess, early June. And subsequent batches are actually a lot quicker, less than 3 months, I think we said yesterday in the press release. And so, really, we're first half of this year. And then we have other isotopes as well, where they may well come out this first half year as well, or they will come out this first half year. I'm just not quite sure exactly the month yet.
Someone wants to know, when is the next earnings report?
We have to file our 10K, I believe, by April 1, because March 31 falls on a Sunday this year. So before that date, we sat with the auditors today and the accountants, so we're on the process to doing it, but before April 1 is the answer.
Erwin Shane, please go ahead.
Yeah, in the biotechnology, when companies are finding these unusual products where they see tremendous advancement, they acquire the company at a huge premium to what their actual stock price is. Could something like that be possible in your situation? Because it seems you've got such uniqueness that there should be several companies wanting to say, hey, become a part of us. You're going to get big money, and we'll all join in winning this tremendous game here. I mean, if someone made an offer like that, would you be tempted?
Absolutely, we would. Yes, I mean, we look at any offer or interaction or what have you with companies, whenever they happen. Absolutely, we would. I would just remind you that we have a broad range of isotopes here, and so we may solve the solution for a particular drug, but we also have solutions for semiconductors and other drugs and nuclear fuel. And actually, talking to a lot of the companies in the downstream industries, they would rather, they don't really care about owning the plant. What they want is a secure supply of materials. So, for example, we're talking to an American company right now, asking if they would like to own part of the plant, and the response was, actually, we're not really into nuclear medicine or nuclear isotope production. What we want is X kilos of this isotope guaranteed every year at this price. And if you can do that, that's all we need. But yeah, listen, I wouldn't say we're up for sale, but we'll certainly look at anything that comes to us.
Yeah, and also, are you getting offers to assist in your capital needs from? I think you said something about that, getting offers from companies that see the product that they need from you Are they willing to put up cash so that you don't have to struggle to
Yeah,
going? You know,
absolutely. And that's exactly how we expect to grow, using other people's balance sheet rather than our balance sheet. And again, if a customer needs 10 kilos of a particular isotope per year, and that they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars developing a business that requires it, putting down $5 million to secure themselves a 20-year supply of that it's an easy conversation to have.
Thank you very much for that, Irv. Shane. Paul, how does the spot price in uranium, which hit $100 a pound today, affect the HALEU market?
So, obviously, the higher the price of uranium, the higher the price of HALEU. And as I said earlier, uranium ore is over half the price of HALEU right now, if someone could produce HALEU. Now, what I would point out is our process, we hope to be able to use depleted tails, which probably come at a very low cost, if even a cost. And actually, that's the higher the price of uranium, the more competitive our process will be. But clearly, the higher price of HALEU is a problem for many SMR companies who have, who are kind of relying on cheaper uranium, and it's a problem actually for many utility companies. I mean, when you think about the uranium market over the last 30 years. If you've been a uranium buyer at a US utility company, you need some fuel. It's been a bit like turning on the tap, water just comes out of it. And I think people have woken up and realized that we're in a different environment now. There's been almost zero investment in this industry over the last 30 years. You've seen mines shutter, conversion shutter, and enrichment prices drop to below where you can reinvest capital into the business. So you've seen no innovation or investment in this industry for 2 or 3 decades. And then, for the first time ever, we're now starting to predict kind of 3% volume growth per year out to 2050. And we're seeing that's coinciding with a kind of a supply side shock at the same time. And it's just no juice in the tank. And I think, it's going to be problematic these next couple of years. I mean, the fact that Macron flew to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan to secure their uranium, and Putin went 2 days later, kind of shows you just, the trouble the world is in right now, securing nuclear fuels. I mean, we haven't seen this for 20, 30 years, and it's problematic.
Are there any governmental or intra-governmental funds that ASP Isotopes has been actively pursuing? I know there is a new fund for HALEU enrichment. There is another fund for non-Russian enrichment.
Yeah, so we're talking to a number of governments. I probably can't really say much more than that. But obviously, you've seen the headlines. The UK has just announced £300 million to incentivize HALEU production in the United Kingdom. The US, significantly more. Other countries are looking at how they can increase their output as well. As I said a few minutes ago, we're seeing real distress in these markets. And I would argue most governments and countries, it's too little too late, and we're going to have problems over the next couple of years. But we'll see.
Are you going to submit a proposal for Biden's nuclear plan to compete with Silex's to receive grant money as a nascent HALEU producer?
I probably won't respond to that question. I think we'll make an announcement if and when we do it. Yeah.
Any
I'll
plan?
leave it at that.
Thank you very much. No problem at all. Any plan to have a plant in the United States?
Again, I think I'll probably avoid answering that question. What I've said is we're talking to multiple governments. There are some obvious countries that one would be looking to put a plant in. USA is one of those. And actually the regulatory pathway in the US is actually simpler than other countries as well. And there's obviously a lot of enthusiasm and money incentivizing people to try and come to the US.
Are you planning to sell part of Quantum Leap Energy to a major player the way Silex sold part of GLE to Cameco, perhaps Orano or BHP, or will profits accrue to the company?
So what we've said is that we would we've signed MOUs with some SMR companies, and those MOUs may allow for them to invest in either a plant or in Quantum Leap. And we've also had a lot of reverse inquiries from investors who would like to invest in Quantum Leap. And so we're kind of working out, what the best path forwards is there at the moment.
Can you elaborate on the terms of the MOUs/discussions for HALEU, timeframes, low enrichment uranium input, etc.?
I can't really, because they're confidential. But what I can say is, in terms of timings, we've said we'd like to try and get HALEU to the market by 2027 in significant quantities that will allow companies to start to operate SMRs. And in terms of the fuel, the feedstock, we haven't yet decided what feedstock we would want to put into the first plant initially. We've kind of said we may use LEU, we may use natural. We're unlikely to start with depleted tails. We would probably expect some help in securing that feedstock from the customer.
Why are you addressing so many markets? Would there be an advantage to concentrating on carbon-14, for example?
Well, so the carbon-14 market is a pretty small market. We will probably, it's a pretty small market. That plant you saw could probably supply the entire world's demand of carbon-14. So we can't really grow that market much more. Other markets are much smaller and growing. So right now, the silicon-28 market is probably just a couple of $1 million a year. But if we believe in quantum computing and artificial intelligence and the need for more powerful semiconductors in 5-10 years' time, it could be substantially larger. And it'd be nice to get a dominant position in that market now as it's forming. And also, some of our plants can produce multiple isotopes as well. So again, there may not be the demand as we enter these markets for the plant just to produce one isotope.
What isotopes have been manufactured by your plants so far?
So at small scale, our plants have enriched silane, so silicon-28. They've enriched oxygen, and we've enriched methane, so carbon-13 actually. They're the main ones so far. But we haven't really sold. This is more for research and development of the plant. As I said, we'll start commercial activities during this first half of the year.
Regarding carbon isotopes now being manufactured, how do you assess the quality of the output?
So we use a mass spectrometer to tell us what the abundance of the target isotope is. So in the case of carbon-14, we'll be enriching it to greater than 85%, and our feedstock comes at 0.5%. So that's a lot of enrichment for a single enrichment process. And I say an ICP-MS, a mass spectrometer, is an easy way of doing it. And then certificate of analysis showing what it is, and that's how we tell the customer what the enrichment level is.
I believe your first announcement of a contract was with the Chinese company. This person writes, any update on where contracts stand with the Chinese in terms of anticipated revenues?
Yes, we've signed 3 contracts. Our first contract was with a Chinese company called Brichem. That's a subsidiary of CNNC, and they manage a lot of the stable isotopes that go into China. That contract was for up to $27 million of highly enriched molybdenum-100 per year. We think it'll take some time for China to go into that kind of volume, maybe a few years. But we'd expect to start supplying them this year, and just in small quantities, and then help them grow their market and help them grow their downstream demand over the next several years.
What is the downtime at a plant when shifting from manufacturing one isotope to another?
So it depends on from what isotope to which isotope, but it can be as little as a day or two. It can be longer. Typically, a production run of an isotope takes about 90 days. So, and there's always a few days while we're turning around in between one batch to the next.
You may have covered this earlier, but let's just see. Can you comment on the recent U.S. government request for proposal for HALEU and how you might participate?
Yeah, I think I've said I'm probably not going to comment on that until we actually do something publicly. There's no point speculating about it right now, but obviously, it's an attractive opportunity for us to participate in that market.
We are over time, but there have been just so many questions and such great participation. Thank you very much, everyone. Final question we're going to take here is, any talk with Intel for Silicon 28?
So we're talking to a number of semiconductor companies, and obviously, they're all confidential, so I can't really talk about any particular customer. But we'd like to be a big participant in a supplier to the quantum computing industry in the future.
Okay, thank you everyone for your questions, and I apologize to those of you who haven't had your questions answered yet today, but I'm going to forward them all to Paul, and he's going to be able to look at them. If you want more information on ASP Isotopes, please reach us at 1-800-RedChip. That's 1-800-733-2447, or email us at aspi@redchip.com. Please visit the information page created by RedChip for ASP Isotopes. It's redchip.com/stocks/ASPI. There you can view and download the investor presentation and fact sheet and sign up for news alerts on ASP Isotopes. Please also visit the website of ASP Isotopes. It's aspisotopes.com. For a replay of today's webinar, you can go to redchip.com/events and scroll down to the archive. You can use the same link that was provided to you by Zoom to join the live version of today's webinar. Thanks again to our many participants today, and thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you all for listening, and thank you for your interest. Have a good evening.